Greetings. Allow me to introduce, I am Mike Turner from the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem and one of the conveners of the Heritopolis Globinar. Heritopolis, it's a heritage in the metropolis, an open-ended consortium with 21 university partners as part of the UN Habitat Metro Hub. These includes 7 UNESCO chairs, 1 Category 2 center, 20 metropolises, 17 with World Heritage status, and 9 on the UN Habitat Global Sample. Established during 2021 to explore how metropolises are being reshaped by heritage, redefining their meaning, this largest category of urban settlement is growing rapidly in number and importance globally. The UN predicts 1 new metropolis to emerge every 2 weeks over the next 5 years. Metropolises are beyond the city, linking symbiotically urban and rural with the tangible and intangible heritage. There is no conservation without creation. With the architecture of today being the heritage of tomorrow, we are concerned about the role of cultural and natural heritage in the planning, design, and management of the 21st century in the digital era. The Heritopolis Lunchtime Globinar, 35 panelists from 19 metropolises in 3 webinars will contribute to global reflection, each with its own perspective and geocultural identity. The diversities of the smorgasbord and the traditions of the Izivivana are essential ingredients of metropolitan heritage. It will provide, with all of your active participation, critical inputs for reporting to the UNESCO Mondial Cult 2022 and the UN Habitat Metro Hub with new innovative approaches for future heritage. I take this opportunity of thanking all our amazing consortium members and institutional partners and wish the success to the initiative and welcome the greetings from our sponsors, UNESCO and UN Habitat. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, friends, participants from all over the world, it is an honor and a great pleasure for me to convey to you the congratulations of the UNESCO World Heritage Center for organizing this important side event. The new heritage dimension for the 21st century, Globinar, organized by the Global University Consortium Heritopolis at UN Habitat, is a major contribution to sustainable urban and metropolitan development policies and to the discussions that will take place during the 2022 Mundial Conference in Mexico at the end of September. Within its mandate of heritage protection, UNESCO has always promoted cultural and natural heritage as fundamental enablers of urban sustainable development, and the World Heritage Convention has focused more and more its attention on the urban dimension of heritage with over 300 inscribed cities. In 2011, the UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape established a clear link between urban conservation and sustainable development and has promoted an innovative approach to urban planning rooted on heritage. This vision has been further strengthened by Target 11.4 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, with cultural and natural heritage supporting safe, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable communities. On the occasion of the 3rd Habitat Conference in Quito in 2016, UNESCO presented an important report, Culture Urban Future, where heritage, both cultural and natural, was proposed as a key dimension of the urban and metropolitan development within the new urban agenda. Building on this policy framework, as we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, and with growing urbanization, the Innovative Heritage and the Metropolis Initiative is addressing new multidisciplinary challenges of cultural identities in the coming century, highlighting the socio-economic transformation and new digital technologies. The Heritopolis Globinar is opening new perspectives that will assist UNESCO in shaping its future heritage policies. I would like to thank you for this important contribution, and I look forward to receiving the results of your Globinar at the Mondial Cult Conference in Mexico.
Honorable organizers, dear participants, dear friends, welcome to the first Globinar on New Heritage Dimensions for the 21st century. This Globinar is taking place around the world in Africa, Europe, Americas, Asia, and the Pacific. This is an excellent opportunity to deliver to the UNESCO Mondial Cult the preliminary findings of the research undertaken in 15 metropolis in the context of this initiative. UN Habitat is pleased to be associated with this initiative, particularly the global survey and policy recommendation that highlight the cultural value of metropolis. Let us work together to bring on board more metropolises to this initiative and contribute to expand the approach of metropolis for a better future. We at UN Habitat are convinced that culture and heritage are important entry points for a more comprehensive urban, metropolitan, and territorial management approach. You may recall that the 11th session of the World Urban Forum held in Katowice, Poland in June 2022 under the theme of transforming our cities for a better urban future witnessed our strong commitment to culture and heritage. The final declaration of World Urban Forum 11 includes the commitment that reads as follows: reconfirm that culture as a core component of local identity, including heritage, creativity, and diversity, is an integral part of the solution to the challenges of urbanization, including urban crisis, and to achieving the new urban agenda. Dear friends, UN Habitat is also expanding its new strategic framework that will include a focus on culture and heritage. We do so because we know that over 60% of urban dwellers live in metropolitan areas of more than 300,000 inhabitants. And this is an indication that metropolis will be one of the main legacies of the urbanization trend for the generation to come. And that's why we need to reconsider the values of the metropolis, the cultural diversity that represent the metropolis, both tangible and intangible. Heritage is an important contributor to the metropolitan sustainable agenda towards a more just, multicultural, and equitable future. For that reason, among the most innovative initiatives of UN Habitat is the Metro Hub, our global initiative to support metropolitan management around the world. Within the Metro Hub, the Heritage Uni partnership is branded Heritopolis. So far, Heritopolis had managed to mobilize over 30 international development actors and large metropolis to work with university and planning agencies from all continents to highlight the heritage of the metropolis. More specifically, we have achieved in a very short time to mobilize 18 global universities and institutions of higher learning, as well as 17 major metropolis. You will agree with me that this initiative is clearly on the move. We know that this initiative has another important factor. It's cross-institutional engagement that includes UN Habitat, UNESCO, metropolitan and territorial planning agencies, ACOMOS, and metropolis, just to name the few, is that institutional strengthening or an component of this Heritopolis. Let me then therefore thank you very much again for this opportunity to be part of this Mondial Cult 2022, and I wish you all a fruitful debate and successful deliberation and learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I'm David Simon from the Department of Geography at Royal Holloway in the University of London. And it was my pleasure to lead a small team undertaking the first baseline survey and the comparative analysis arising from that into the current status, the emerging trends and contributions to sustainability in a sample of 9 of the metropolises that undertook the initial research late last year and early this year. We produced a comparative report on this, which is on the Heritopolis website, in time for the World Urban Forum 11th session in Katowice at the end of June, where we held a side event on this report and its implications. And the video that you're about to see encapsulates some dimensions of the diversity and the relevance, with a highlight for our time zone of the cities in Europe and Africa as defined. I encourage you to look at the full report, which will in turn also be a springboard for our future activities in terms of how we take forward both our understanding of natural and cultural heritage, tangible and intangible, within this set of metropolitan areas, but crucially, how we can mobilize heritage as part of metropolitan identity in the service of future sustainability and resilience strategies. So with that, let us see the movie.
Good afternoon. Let's start the discussions then, now that we know what Heritopolis is and what the primary results of our first research endeavor were. I would like to open a discussion. My name is Joanna Sanetra-Szeliga and I represent UNESCO Chair for Urban Studies and Heritage at the Krakow University of Economics. My research interests include socioeconomic power or potential of cultural and natural heritage. And that's why I'm very happy to moderate this event today, the first part of it, that will be devoted, first of all, to the impact of cultural and natural heritage on metropolises, on their development, as well as the role of heritage in resilience and managing change in our turbulent times, as we can experience them now. Our Globinar, as you know, it's part of Mondia Called 2020. It's a side event, and it's also part of the UN Habitat Metro Hub. And the discussions we are going to have today and the results are going to be reported to UNESCO for contributing to its future cultural policies. They are also quite important for our project, for our consortium, the Heritopolis, where we want to further research and discover the links between heritage and metropolises. And somehow we also think that what we discussed today can be fed into next 2024 World Urban Forum in Cairo. That's another event that we hope to contribute with whatever is said today. With that in mind, I would like to introduce our speakers, our distinguished guests. First, let me introduce Dr. Toki Laotan-Brown from Nigeria, who represents preservation heritage. She's a heritage architect, cultural economist with vast experience in conservation, restoration, and management of heritage. Then we have Eric Heibrecht, in charge of the Institute of International and European Affairs and l'Institut Paris Région, senior architect and urban regional planner with a broad practical as well as academic experience in the field of planning. And then we have Mireille Hasaltun-Wosiński, who represents here both Bahrain and Krakow, Poland. She is a cultural heritage specialist, and in fact, she is a heritage advisor to the Bahrain Authority for Cultural and Antiquities, and she holds a recently finished international MBA related also to heritage issues. And last but definitely not least, Dr. Hassan Radouin, who is a full professor and director of the School of Architecture, Planning and Design at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Morocco. And his research and experience include resilient territorial transformation, sustainable planning, regeneration of urban heritage, and smart buildings and smart cities. As you can see, we have a good number of very experienced and diverse experts, which I hope will contribute to the points we would like to make and the statements we would like to collect also for UNESCO. So before giving them the floor, I would first like to turn to our audience and ask you the question about heritage and the role in development of the cities. I would be very happy if you could please go to the following link that I will post here in the chat for you. And I will share with you the Mentimeter that you can see here. And I would very much like to know what you think is the role of culture and natural heritage in providing better quality of life and socioeconomic development. What do you think its contribution to the development of our cities, our metropolises, our countries can be? Is there something that goes beyond beyond the obvious choices of tourism, for example? What do you think these can be the role, can be the influence, can be the impact? I think that you can easily go now to menti.com, use the code provided in the chat and also on the screen, which is 65855084. 65855084 and write down your answers. Please try to do it. I will wait for a moment for you to answer, for you to gather your thoughts and put any answers on the screen. Okay, we have a first answer: providing a sense of place. Obviously, pride, sharing or common heritage, making a common identity, I suppose. Social well-being as well, the feeling of belonging. Being rooted in a place, which is definitely something quite important for the quality of life, for our well-being. What else do we have? Identity, yes, pride, definitely. Livability. Of course, we have the studies that are conducted all over the world show more and more examples, more and more arguments that can be used also in lobbying, in advocating for including cultural heritage in future policies, and not only cultural policies, because what's important, I think, it's for all of us to actually be aware that culture should not be only a part of cultural policies, but what's more important, that should be part of sustainable development policies, and only then the full potential of cultural heritage, natural heritage, can be used and exploited for the good of the people and the better quality of life that we are having. Education, something new came up here. Surprisingly, well, identity is the thing that most of you think it's quite important, and it's well associated with heritage and well-being and development. Economic aspects are not very much present here, but I think we are going to have them more seen in the discussions that we are having. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the topic with us. And I would like to ask and move on to the discussion with our distinguished panelists. And first, I would like to pose the question to Eric, sort of a most general opening argument about why actually should we discuss heritage and metropolises, and maybe not heritage and just cities, what this metropolis aspect brings into the discussion on the impact of heritage on development, on sustainable development.
Yes, this is a very large question, but I think this is very important to take a look at that. Why heritage in the metropolis? Or just because the metropolis is probably the main, one of the main artifacts of our global civilization today. We can say, as it was said before, that more than 60% of the urban population is living in metropolitan areas today. And so that increase. And so this will be our main legacy of this century for the next generation. So it's a crucial topic to give more value, more cultural value to our metropolises. And so this is the reason why we're working on that topic. So the idea, if we want to make the link with the socioeconomics, the definition itself of the metropolis is an economic definition. The functional urban area defined by OECD is based on the economic basin and the mobility basin. And so the link between, if we make the metropolis as a heritage, we consider that we should give more, not economic value, this is not the topic, but this economic tool will have more value for the people, for the identity, for the culture of the people who are living in metropolis. So this is truly interesting to have this in mind. And this changed the approach for the heritage concept, the patrimoine, because we should think differently, because the metropolis is not, in fact, you can say it is an artifact, but it is mainly a function. It is, the metropolis is a node in a world of nodes. And the metropolis itself is what is the, you can say, the attribute of the metropolis. It is the nodes inside the metropolis, and it is the network. And so if we want to give more value to the metropolis, we should think about the value of these nodes and these networks. This concern the public space, for example, or the CBD, or the data center, or the different centers inside the city, and or the airport, the railway station, etc. But not like it is related to architecture, if you want, or the urban design, but it's not only that. Because the metropolis is based on the functions. And so you can change the towers in the CBD. It's not a problem for the metropolis. The CBD will be the same representation for the metropolis with different objects inside. And so we are something which is moving. So we are less on conservation. We are more on increasing the value. So we're questioning, we should have some, we are questioning the policies at the metropolitan scale, or all the policies that apply in the metropolis, and to see and to evaluate how these policies are producing more values for the metropolis itself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's very interesting what you said, and I would like to ask you a little bit. You said that metropolis is mainly a function. What function can it play for heritage, you think? I mean, in terms of, I don't know, management or triggering impact?
So there is some cities that are considering that culture and heritage is part of their planning, their policy. So this is truly important. And so they use the heritage as a tool for their own development at the metropolitan scale. This is the case of London, for example, or Istanbul. And so it's very big cities. And so it's not a nut, but generally they use the existing, what is already recognized as heritage, or perhaps sometimes they use new heritage like industrial heritage to make it and to support their cultural policy. But we can also have in mind that if we consider the metropolis as a heritage, we will look on other objects, on other production, like I said, like the other centers inside the city, or the data center, or the when we, just an example, when we work on the public space, when we transform and in the large connection, which is through public space with motorways, with large boulevard. When we change in Paris, we cancel 2 motorways and change it in public space for promenade, for leisure, etc. We change completely the value of this space, which is only functional before, and now it is part of the identity of Paris. And so it's not the change, only the change of practice or use of the use of this space, which changes also the representation of this space for the people. And so you see, we should work on this, the attributes of the metropolis, and see, are we going in the right direction to make the metropolis with more cultural value, or do we are we producing something for the metropolis? So we're creating new heritage, in fact, with this. But the vision of the heritage will be not only focusing on monuments, historical centers, historical landscapes, and some vernacular monuments or buildings, because they are old. We are looking for the present. And we're looking for what we are doing with the present to develop more value for our legacy for the next generation.
Yeah, I very much like the idea of creating new value and making heritage work also for the future generations, for our legacy. And I would like to now ask Toki, what is her opinion on that? I mean, how can heritage really influence the life in a metropolis, and what actions could be taken to create that value that Eric was talking about? How we can make the impact also maybe greater?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I will agree with what Eric is saying, but I will also add that with the African concept, we're talking more about living heritage, right? So with Africa, it's more of a life cycle type of thinking. So where we allow certain elements of that to die as well, which is also important for the life cycle of the metropolis. So when we're talking about the African cities or African metropolis, we're talking about looking more at interconnected policies around territorial spatial developments, which is a huge thing within Africa, and then sustainable kinship plans because of, again, of the numerous ethnic associations, being developed in Africa, where we are losing a lot of the elements when it comes to kinship, and then establish local cultural heritage practices. So a collaboration among governments, departments across levels of governments. Again, government is an issue with Africa, the private sector, diverse groups, community organizations, which we tend to always forget whenever we're developing policies around the metropolis, especially again in Africa. And so our challenges for African cities requires also taking some measured risk, which I believe widespread accountability when it comes to leadership, strategic principles, and flexible tactics. Again, very important because we're dealing with numerous different types of ethnic groups. And then having African cities build creative innovation capacity when it comes to their own cultural heritage, because a lot of this is taken from Western cultures as well, which also creates urban fragmentation within the African metropolis. And so this creates a breaking down of, or maybe looking at shifting mindsets, and then breaking down stereotypes, rebalancing risk, visioning, building consensus, and creating the conditions for people to become agents of change rather than victims of change. And then another challenge for the cities in Africa is also building creative mental infrastructure, because I think, again, well-being, the whole idea of well-being economics is very important in this aspect. A creative, accountable urban governance system, and a new mental infrastructure called to develop, a wealth of tools, strategies, policies, and frameworks designed to build a cultural heritage of creativity and innovation, because we have to also remember that heritage also evolves. Living heritage evolves. And it's important to understand that as we interact with different ethnicities or groups or kinships or non-kinships, as the case may be in different parts of the world, not just Africa, that we are also having to deal with this type of complexities when it comes to urban fragmentation within the metropolis.
Yeah, well, definitely that is the case. Also, in some aspects of that you mentioned, there are also problems in Europe, I think. But what is quite important here is the concept of living heritage, that it's not a static concept, it's a dynamic concept that changes. And that's why it's quite important to actually involve people whose heritage we're talking about in dealings with the heritage, when using the heritage in policies for the heritage. Do you think there is a solution for, I mean, a good practice that you could mention how to actually involve people in the...
Well, we will always say that we want inclusivity, right?
Yeah, but how to do it?
So how to get people to be part of this inclusivity is an issue, because everybody's capacity to be part of the communal also depends on this inclusivity, because if people do not share the same value system, right, their capacity to be part of the communal, I would say communal, becomes limited to what they value. So for instance, a particular ethnic group or kinship group decides that this particular monument is important for the metropolis. And another group feels no, because we're in an era of, you know what, let's cancel that, right? And so when we're dealing with, different ideologies, depending on what people value as a heritage system, it does impact on what or how the metropolis actually starts to emerge from all of this.
Yeah, definitely. That is a great challenge, I think, everywhere to actually manage also people expectations and different different needs. Definitely. Well, I would like to just comment to our audience that if you want to comment or ask a question, please do use the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible to throughout our time. So don't be shy to ask us questions, and ask particular participants of the panel their questions as well. Thank you, Taki, and I would like to ask the opinion of Mireille, actually, because what's important here, and it was quite a little bit mentioned already, is the management of heritage. And I was wondering if there is such a way to actually manage heritage, some proper way to manage heritage to make it more useful, or to use it, not abuse it, in socioeconomic development. What do you think?
Thank you, Joanna. So I will have this very general statement before going into more specific part. What I think is that culture is key to understand each other and promote peace and develop a sense of belonging to the environment we live in. And when we speak about metropolises, we have all this diverse environment and very, very speedy pace of life. So it is very important that we preserve this peace and understanding of each other. But unfortunately, in a managerial sense, the power of culture is often overlooked, and the responsibility of promoting and propagating culture is often thought to belong to the government exclusively. And I have to say that it is this proper management has to recognize that it's a shared responsibility. Mm-hmm. So how I see in a metropolis, with this also the report shows the speed of transformation, migration, and diversity, and in the life where dynamic economic and commercial dynamics are very important, then cultural heritage becomes a sort of constant in the equation, not in the sense that it becomes it doesn't change, it's of course changing, but it is a hub to anchor to, with a strong influence on belonging, identity, understanding each other, and understanding the behaviors, the reactions of each other, and harmonizing ourselves with our surroundings. In here, onion analogy, I really like it, because it is culture or cultural heritage. There is a part that you see, the tangible aspects, and the more in you go inner, you just connect to these behaviors and reactions part, and it is intangible parts, and it's very interesting. And in an effort to add a different perspective to this management part, proper management should recognize the power of the private sector, because the private sector is the leading power of economy in metropolises. Private sector is also becoming more a key partner in local development, because they have the financial, human, technological, and technical resources. And then the question becomes, how can we establish the stronger ties between these businesses and the culture sector? As the environmental concerns somehow is becoming more and more important for the private sector, but sustainable development has different pillars, and culture is an important part of all of these pillars. And adding to this, interpretation and communication plays a crucial role in here, because also previous panelists mentioned there are multiple narratives. It is quite diverse, and we have to understand the meaning for the locals, for the citizens, as well as the international communities of the metropolis that are just working there, or visitors, and short-term residents, and we are also living in a nomadic world now for the nomads. And how can we tell the story that each of these different communities can connect to the environment that they are living in, and hence leaving nobody behind. So I can give an example from Krakow, because Krakow is quite strong in cultural heritage and with the cultural institutions. It also has this large number of foreign businesses and corporations in a rather small scale of metropolis. And in a recent research I conducted, I was actually interested in knowing how important is Krakow's heritage for the employees of these international corporations. And the results show that culture and cultural activities in a city is really important for the social well-being of the employees. So this is quite interesting. But then how we can connect to this business world in a better way is still a topic to tackle.
Yeah, well, definitely. I also conducted the research which showed that actually also in Krakow, that showed that in a way, part of the decision making in locating a new business by big corporations is also culture and cultural heritage in a city they want to invest in. Of course, there are other factors as well, but it's not to be forgotten that culture is quite an important part of decision making as well, especially in those companies that can move around and they are not really tied to any resources, natural resources that we have. And obviously, the private sector, there's also this problem or fear that they can abuse heritage, they can commercialize it. That's also another topic that could, well, we could discuss it really quite a lot. We have quite a short time. That's why I will move on to a next question. But if any of you, the panelists, would like to comment then on what everybody else said, I would be happy to give you some time. But first, let me invite Hassan to tell us what does he think is the role of urban conservation in creating, in supporting sustainable and inclusive development of a city. What role can be played and what kind of projects or actions could be taken?
Thank you. Do you hear me, please?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
I will ask you to allow me to be a little bit more leaning to controversy.
Very well.
To add some spice to the discussion.
Please do.
We can't come right now, 2021, and talk how urban conservation or cultural heritage will be included into the metropolis to synergize it. And I am among the first ones who are really advocating how to link cultural heritage to economic development, let's say sustainable development, because economic development with economists will be in trouble. It will be just number of indicators and getting profits, and this is not the value of cultural heritage. So what is the real capital of cultural heritage? To have an inclusive economic development rather than just to explore and profit from cultural heritage via sucking the money from the tourist pockets.
Right.
I am very frank, and please bear with me. So you have the modern metropolis, its raison d'etre is totally contradictory to preservation of cultural heritage. Since Athens Charter, with the rise of the modern urban planning, which is based on mere functional programs of the metropolis and how to make the city like the machine, and then we were advocating modernism ideology modernist that was started by tabula rasa, that we should not actually bring culture to functions and make the city more like a machine.
Right.
And now coming and saying, wow, cultural heritage should be at the center of the economic development of metropolis. We have a problem here. So please, I will follow up with my colleague from the African continent. We should first dismantle the metropolis and its raison d'etre that was not advocating cultural heritage at its capital. So how first to bring cultural heritage to metropolis, not as set of relics, not as set of tangible frozen object in a museum, but how to restore the culture in the metropolis that modern urban planning have actually raised its memory. Hence, the question here is not just about cultural heritage and how to explore it for economic development, but rather, I will use the term of cultural resilience, how to restore the memory of the inhabitants of the metropolis, to rejuvenate the cultural bond among citizens, among inhabitants. And hence, the smartness of the metropolis is indeed the smartness of the inhabitants. So we're not talking about a set of gadgets making the city more functional, more efficient, more connected, more stuff but we don't say why we connect them, why we do them. Is it just for the profit, or is it for to enhance the cultural social capital of the metropolis? So hence, we have a very tough job. How to boost, as my colleague from the context of Africa, to boost the living heritage. And even this term living heritage is becoming problematic because we made it dead and then we are trying to convert it to be living. And how taking a couple of kids to the museum and we make it living. Is it not that? Is the genius loci? Is when you go like an anthropologist and you go to tribes, you go to different people, even in the metropolis, the most modern one, we have tribes. Because if we ignore culture, so they are just bunch of what kind of pieces, object like living in a metropolis. So how can we rejuvenate this living part, which is more about the resilience? What is resilience? Resilience is not about catastrophes and of course, the time to get solutions, resolutions for the catastrophe. This is not resilience. This is the superficial resilience. Resilience, the more we solve the problems of the community in a very catastrophic time, the more we boost their cultural resilience to be more immune to problems. Hence, we need to boost this cultural resilience within the metropolis, for this cultural resilience to be the capital for sustainability. And hence the importance of restoring sustainability from the social cultural point of view, from the environmental point of view. And thank you, because you mentioned natural heritage and no one has said that again. So environmental, ecological sustainability, and then not economic, is not economic development. We say economic development. I am, as a youngster, when I started with the conservation program of the Medina of Fez with UNESCO, we've made a huge conference on the sponsors to find how we can finance the urban conservation of the Medina of Fez. And then we invited the World Bank. The World Bank came and they gave a loan to the Medina. But trust me, 2 years of fighting, debating, arguing with the expert of the World Bank, because they did not recognize that cultural heritage is a value within the World Bank. And thanks to the previous president, I forgot his name, who came as president of the World Bank to Fez, and he noticed that something missing in the World Bank. They are working on infrastructure, they are working on poverty alleviation, they are working on all economic return, but they never considered culture as a capital to give loans to different cities. And Fez, the Medina, was the first Medina old city based on cultural heritage that James Wolfenson convinced his board in the World Bank to finance Fez and give the credit. Why? From that time, the question is, what is the link between cultural heritage and economics? I'm sorry, the macro economy, the modern market will not recognize for you what is actually heritage, only from return that comes from tourists. So this is why I will include new concepts in the metropolis. The metropolis should recognize the dimension of technique. Techne is a Greek term, not technology, the baby of science. Techne is the know-how of the local community that makes their living resilient. And how can, in Africa, for instance, in Morocco, we started that, how to go and boost the know-how, the crafts, not crafts only for tourists, but actually their living crafts, and how can we synergize them to be updated, to be in tandem with the modern market and create a real economic development based on sustainable development that is linked to the know-how and the local know-how. So cultural heritage, not a set of relics, not a monument to take photographs, but actually, like we have a social evaluation for the conservation program of Fez. One of the craftsmen, he said, you're talking about monuments like something big. I am the monument. The craftsman himself, he said, I am the monument. Please, could you restore me? This is actually what is a problem. So the modern metropolis went astray, and now we are coming back to restore its cultural heritage. I think the discussion was what strategies, what policies, all the stakeholders, they should be actually assembled in order to set new resolutions that cultural heritage is not a veneer and is not just set of monuments to polish the facade of metropolis, but actually is a resilient, it's actually a cultural resilience that pushes sustainability, where actually heritage is part of development, part of the progress, and is not just something to make it like a veneer. One, I think I have four actions: identification, adoption, transformation. Identification, we need to sensitize the community, the stakeholders, the politicians, the academicians, all to be identified with cultural heritage, restore its real value, not only what we see now with the UNESCO Convention of 1972, that was all about relics. Honestly, even they are now trying to develop, and all what we're talking about is out of the Convention of 1972, because the Convention of 1972 is all about fragments and buildings. Even the socio-economic is not mentioned there. The environmental is not mentioned there. Yeah. So therefore, identification, adaptation, how to adapt this cultural heritage to the true sense of the metropolis, not just like relics or the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, but no, it should be in the Ministry of Industry, like in Morocco, we have now Artisana, a whole program that not looks like this, like producers of gifts for tourists. No, is part of the economy to sustain the resilience of community. Adoption, I think very important to adopt cultural heritage in policies, not just to adopt. And then, of course, while we're transforming the metropolis, and by the way, we are in 2022, and it's so scary with all these notions of smartness, and all the transformation is now 4.0, and even heritage will no longer go and touch it. It's virtually, you can even dream about it and live within it with virtual reality. So what kind of transformation and how can cultural heritage play a major role in the planning processes? We cannot plan the metropolises with modern tools and then come back to bring the cultural heritage back. So a priori, in the modern master planning, all the planners, they should consider cultural heritage as one of the capitals that should be included in policies, and how through smart governance we can bring that. Thank you. I've been long. Thank you so much. But
thank you. But
I would add some spice to the discussion. All right. Thank you so much.
No, those are actually excellent points, because I think what we are still lacking, because among ourselves here we are talking, we are preaching, to the convinced people. We know, preaching to the choir. We know that culture and heritage can have impact. It's important, but what's a challenge is to have this interdisciplinary, diverse approach adopted by the policies. What you said, that culture is not only part of cultural Ministry of Culture, it should be part of other ministries and their policies, and that's the challenge, I think, actually, to include culture and cultural heritage in different policies that deal with different domains of our lives. And I think the challenge is to convince actually politicians that it's worth it. And that's why we have a discussion on socioeconomic potential of culture and cultural heritage and natural heritage, because we need to have arguments to advocate for the use of culture and cultural heritage in the policies, and not only cultural policies, because those we have, the other policies. Exactly. Yeah, we don't have really much time, but I would like our other panelists to comment on that, starting maybe with Mireille, how you think resilience and heritage, and what actually has been said today, can be used by heritage, or how can we use heritage in these kind of actions?
Thank you, Joanna. So again, referring to the first statement that I made, I think heritage is a constant in this equation. And also, I like the statement of European Union. It's defined as a strategic resource for development. So putting this is the primary support for resilience, which is like bouncing back and absorbing the tension and providing somewhat flexibility to this development or recovery. And we have to recognize that cultural heritage is a non-renewable resource. There are several examples of this destruction, and once done, there is no going back. And this is an important part. And we have to also review why in the first economically challenging situation, culture sector is the first one that gets affected, and the funds are cut from the culture sector as the first measure. So so the principal factor is that cultural heritage is difficult to quantify. Of course, talking about these values and the intangible parts especially. And this also makes it difficult to quantify for sustainable development indicators too. It was mentioned from the previous by the previous panelists. So we have this cultural capital in addition to the physical or financial capital, human capital, and natural capital. And this has to somehow, we have to transmit this understanding of value created by culture, both in economic terms, in social sense, but also in the way that we know the best, how it contributes to the overall society. Okay, yeah. So recognizing the layers of this metropolis is a start. All these traditions, the values, adding the human factor and the urban qualities, and also the creative industries, because culture-based economies inspire at the end more equal, inclusive, and sustainable economies by recognizing these local skills, traditional knowledge, and local products and producers. And this is direct support with to several sustainable development goals. So I think in the overall management sense, this integration of culture in normative, strategic, and operational levels is very important. Normative levels, of course, with the legal adjustments, strategic levels with the policies and the strategic documents that we do, but also important to transmit all of this into plans that are with actions that are realistic, implementable, and that has clear indicators to monitor the process.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you. I won't comment on it because we don't have the time, but I would like to ask Toki, what is her opinion on strengthening the potential of heritage for the resilience and for making a city or a metropolis livable?
Well, the full measure of heritage within the urban political terrain can only be apprehended via the appreciation of how local people work within their indigenous practices. And the metropolis can be understood, especially, I think, as Hassan has said before, in terms of territorial densities, prognosicities, intensities, and their effects. And furthermore, the particular form of spatial configuration, again, the resilience to that, because the more we segregate people from their natural culture, so I'm not taking away from the natural elements of what it means to be part of land. It means that when we take people away from that connection, we lose our identity towards the environment, which is what is happening at the moment. There is this a bliss that we're in, that we tend to work outside what is actually happening to us as a people. So when the environment is not considered in every element, especially the indigenous thinking behind it, then we lose the connection to it. We're seeing it everywhere. Climate change is telling us that we're losing our connection to place, to land, to what makes us us. And so when we lose that identity, what do we have really? We have an empty shell of the metropolis.
And that's an excellent point, actually. And we haven't talked much about the climate catastrophe, what we might already call it, and the climate change, but the ecological aspect of heritage and the natural heritage. That's obviously a very important part of heritage that sometimes people living in cities tend to forget, I think, and that's a huge mistake. Finally, I would like Eric to give us his last comments on the topic, please. And maybe if you could, because I just seen that there is one question in the chat. Since it's one, we'll try to maybe answer it. It's about the fact that people in the metropolis are not that connected to the metropolis as an area. So how we can create a policy that will make them feel belonging to this something bigger than a city, the metropolis. I know it's lots of things to touch upon, but if you please try.
Now, what is So now the question is more on resilience, and and one of the main challenge we're facing is climate change, and this changed completely the way to manage to plan the metropolis. And today, the most important is to reduce urban expansion, to have more services in the proximity and job in the proximity, so access to everything in 20 minutes or 15 minutes if you want, etc. And so the main focus of planning is on the urban renewal. And what is interesting here is there is a contradiction, but it's manageable from place to place, where there is some place we should conserve because of their high value. This is the recognized heritage that can be expanded. And at the same time, there is the urban renewal, where there is some place where decayed or brownfields, etc. And the process to transform this area is, in a lot of places, is based on the participatory process with the neighbors, with the owners, of course, and the and other association and people who wants to do something in the city. And it is also what is very interesting is that the relation with culture or creative economy is not only that, but also leisure. Generally, there is a lot of leisure project and cultural project in that area. And so we can say that the link with this transformation, because of the challenge of climate change, the link with the resilience of the city and the challenge with climate change is completely linked. In fact, the dynamic is linked with the development of the creativity, the development of the cultural economy, and it is located in the place where we can change the city in the brownfield, etc. And so there is tactical urbanism, and creative economy is really very is linked together in environment. But the other point is that there is a close link with the metropolis and culture. If you just have a look on London or Paris, it is about 20% of the jobs are in the cultural creative economy and cultural economy in that two cities. It's more than finance, the number of jobs. It's not the same GDP, of course, because they are not well paid, generally, except few, but it is very, very important for that. And we will see, if we have data, we'll see something similar in a lot of other places in Africa, in Asia, in other cities. So there is some initiatives, some association working between major city working on the cultural economy and make this link with the heritage, etc. So there is contradiction with the metropolis, and also the metropolis use, and it is part of the metropolis and its economic development to develop this specific capacity that have the metropolis because they are cosmopolitan. The creativity is higher than everywhere. And this is one part of the capacity, and the economic development of the metropolis is based on this creativity, not only on culture, but in technology and other things. But it is completely linked with the cosmopolitan feature of the metropolis itself. So the link is very, very important. And we have specific bodies with large cities, which are different than small cities for this reason.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, the problem here is that we have touched upon different topics, and they can invite a lot of discussions and a lot of questions and a lot of comments. And since I was just told that our time as a panel is up, I am sorry I cannot give a floor to anybody else right now, but I would propose that anybody who would like to comment on what has been said, please still use the Q&A section of the Zoom that we are here, and our panelists are here. We can well relate to you on chat throughout the whole session today. Thank you very much, our panelists. Thank you very much for all your arguments and statements. And I would like to invite Kalander with the next part of our session here. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. We now shift attention from the northern hemisphere of our globe to the southern hemisphere. My name is Kalanda Kamal Khan. I'm a conservation architect, and I teach architecture at the Technical University of Mombasa in Kenya, East Africa. I would like to introduce a short video clip on heritage and the dimension of time. As more people migrate to the metropolis of historic Mombasa on the East African coast of Kenya, and also it's the second largest city of Kenya after Nairobi, for purposes of tourism, trade, and in search of employment, amongst other reasons and factors, transformation and fusion of both tangible and intangible heritage takes place along intergenerational lines. We demonstrate this phenomenon using examples of new identities in the built environment and the emergence of new language and music genre. At the end, we showcase some of the ways that the youths are using to promote and conserve the rich and diverse heritage of the metropolis of Mombasa. Let us now enjoy this video clip. Thank you.
To explore the concept of the Heritopolis, the relationship between heritage and the metropolis, we head to Mombasa, a city located on the coastal strip of East Africa. As the second largest city in Kenya after Nairobi, the capital, it is home to the biggest international seaport on the East African coast and two cultural heritage properties, Fort Jesus and Mombasa Old Town. The Portuguese constructed Fort Jesus to guard Mombasa's historic harbor, and it is now a recognized UNESCO World Heritage Site. When viewed from above, its geometry resembles the layout of the human body. A significant portion of Mombasa's rich and diverse heritage is found in Old Town. It's among the heritage properties on the tentative list of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. The emergence of new identities as a result of gentrification, urbanization, migration, and globalization raises the question of what the future of heritage looks like in the metropolis and what this means for sustainable development. The ancient built environment of Mombasa Old Town utilized materials like coral stone and a mortar of lime. The roofs were built from locally available mangrove poles. The ornamental elements included arched lintels with exquisitely carved doorways and finely fashioned wooden balconies, exemplifying the peculiar fusion of cultural influences that is the hallmark of Swahili architecture. However, the modern built environment uses contemporary building materials like concrete and lacks elegantly designed hard wooden doors and balconies. This is ascribed to elements like the dearth of craftsmen skilled in using traditional materials and building contractors who are unaware of and disconnected from Swahili's rich cultural heritage.
Nilikuwa date na msupa na mabeste zake. Ghafla binvu, mamoro fulani wakatuchafia meza na dishi ya bure. Nikauliza, mbona siangukiangi vitu za bwerere? Msupa akanisho, ukidai za bwerere?
Sheng, a new urban language which is a hybrid of Kiswahili, English, and other indigenous languages, has emerged as a new identity representing a third linguistic space between tradition and modernity, rural and urban, Kenya and the globalized world. It has undergone significant development, from a stigmatized slum code to a well-known language that represents linguistic innovation, identity rebellion, urban youth, and the rejection of tribal identities. Sheng has become a necessary marketing tool for both politicians and businesses in urban areas. The rise of new musical identities like Genge
nitacheza kama mimi alafu ngupa trupa cheza kama Lewandowski hivyo ndo sucheza mjini cheza kama wewe cheza kama wewe cheza kama wewe webazu cheza kama wewe.
A subgenre that is derived from Western hip-hop, reggaeton and dancehall has been influenced by Sheng. The eminently danceable hits feature clever and often rude wordplay and catchy hooks, with the accompanying music videos displaying vigorous and unapologetic twerking. Genge is a far departure from the traditional genres like Tarab,
Kwanza hutizama lake, akazunguka na nyuma kutizama yalo kwake, haenuki kusimama kutangaza ya mwenzake, haenuki kusimama kutangaza ya mwenzake.
Which are slow in rhythm with modest videos. Efforts to promote and conserve the rich and diverse cultural heritage have comprised of activities like the Modern Heritage of Africa workshops to create awareness and generate interest in heritage, poetic performances themed on heritage during the monthly Friday poetry, and contribution to technology projects like the Kiswahili dataset for Mozilla Common Voice.
Good afternoon, good morning. I hope the video is over, I'm not sure. Is it over, calendar? Okay, thank you. My name is Dr. Purity Kiora, an archaeologist and a heritage professional at the National Museums of Kenya. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this session of the Globinar on Dimension of Time all the way from Kenya. The Globinar is an integral part of the UNESCO Molducat 2022 and the UN Habitat Metro Hub, and the discussions will be the platform in reporting to UNESCO for future cultural policies and for the integration of heritage in metropolis at the next 2024 World Urban Forum 12 in Cairo. During this particular session of the Globinar, and following the video we've just seen, we will listen to an intergenerational conversation in regards to new generational heritage identities in transforming communities. Our aim is to understand the formation of new metropolitan identities, the primary role of the youth in shaping these identities and creating new heritage expressions, elements, places, sites, while also conserving the legacies of the past. We would like to ask our participants to send questions or comments on the Q&A, and our rapporteur will be able to pick them up, and we hope to address them at the end of the session. Allow me now to introduce our panelists for this session. I'll begin with Professor Francisco Badarin, well known as an architect and urban planner specialized in urban conservation. He holds a degree in architecture from IUAV University in Venice and another in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley, California. He has been a professor at universities, a director of the UNESCO World Heritage Center, and currently is a special advisor to the Director General of ICROM, among many other distinguished positions. Welcome, Professor Badarin.
Thank you.
He will be having a conversation with three young, amazing scholars and practitioners in the fields of heritage and arts. Among them, Ms. Daisy Chesan. Daisy Chesan, you can wave so that they see who you are. She's joining us from the city of Mombasa at the coast of Kenya. Daisy is currently the creative pathway lead at Global Opportunity Youth Network, which is anchored at Swahili Port Hub Foundation in Mombasa. Swahili Port Hub is an incubation center where young talents and innovative ideas and skills are nurtured in the creatives and art sectors through networking, technical training, support, and professional mentorship. Daisy's role in the creative sector is to identify career pathways and entrepreneurship opportunities for youth opportunities in Mombasa. And the group that actually developed the video you've already seen actually comes from the Swahili Port Hub in Mombasa. Then we have Joe Callas, who is part of our World Heritage from Beirut. Joe, thank you. Joe is an architect and currently a PhD student in architectural engineering department at Penn State University in the United States. He has been actively involved in heritage documentation and training, particularly in Lebanon through ICOMOS and UNESCO. Our third young panelist is Daniel Simiyu. Daniel, you can wave, from the Swahili Port Hub in Mombasa. Daniel is a mental health advocate and uses art as a tool for mental health advocacy. He is a certified cultural programmer by the Creative Art Spaces Agency in Kenya and has been involved with poetry at Swahili Port Hub with the youth for the last 5 years. I will now turn it over to Professor Badarin, who will begin the conversation and in fact set the discourse on aspects of heritage, its definition, its identities, and the generations through time. Professor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Purity. Well, let me first, before I give it back to you, perhaps for some questions to the panelists, point to one thing which I think is at the center of our discussion, of our research. As we are, through Heritopolis, we are trying to look for new forms of heritage that adapts better or say more synergetically with a new urban context that we have defined as different from the city itself. We don't think the metropolis is just a big city. We think it's a completely different object, a different animal, if I can use this term, in terms of urban development. Now, the issue is the following: heritage changes. It sounds almost contradictory because sometimes people think that heritage is there to remain as such. On the contrary, we have seen, and I think it's an experience of everybody's, that the concept of heritage change, the types of heritage change a long time, the way in which people use, identify, protect heritage change. And I think this is the point that it's at the core of our discussion. How is this change happening in the new urban context like the metropolis? Just if you look at the past, I don't know, 20, 30 years, you've seen enormous and radical changes in the field of heritage. Historic cities were not heritage 30, 50 years ago. They were not considered heritage. Now is the most represented category in the World Heritage List. Landscapes did not exist until the 1990s. And now it's, everybody talks about landscape, and it's the most prolific, interesting, dynamic, changing, evolving concept, and many others like itineraries and then special sites and so on. So we have seen an enormous transition. Also, the introduction of intangible heritage in the system, not that it didn't exist before, but it was somehow redefined as intangible just 15 years ago, or maybe a little more, 20 years ago, has created a very important change. People now see that as part of the heritage. It's not just a class B type of expression, like the folklore or this kind of thing, the dances. No. It's actually full-fledged heritage, and in some points, in some areas, even more important than physical heritage. But the same change happened for natural heritage. I can tell you 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, nature conservation was essentially eliminating the human presence from nature, so that nature could be exactly preserved as it was. Now, this concept has been completely abandoned, and now we see nature as part of the human development, and we even talk about culture of nature and so on. So there is an evolution. This evolution is the one that we have to understand better, because it's happening in the same way in the metropolis. The metropolis, as a new urban form, will produce its own form of heritage. How? When? How? We don't know yet. This is why we're setting it. But certainly, it's something that will come up, because let's say it in one word: heritage is a social construct. It's not something determined by somebody else. It's determined by the society, the communities. Okay, so if there is a new society, a new community, this will produce its heritage. Which heritage? Let's see. I think there are many, directions that we can explore, and some of them have been already discussed earlier on, and some others will be discussed later, this webinar, maybe the other one that will follow. But certainly we have to point to this idea. Let's see what, now physical heritage and intangible heritage, this division, no good. I don't think we will find much if we keep this straight separation. Culture and nature, we will not find much if we keep this separation. So we have to go beyond these paradigms and find new ways in which we identify, interpret, and use heritage for society. Thank you, Purity. I think you're muted, Purity. Purity, do you unmute? Yeah, voila.
Sorry. Let's move on to Daisy. Daisy, the video shows clearly that culture is an evolving process, something that comes out in new forms as society evolves and changes due to migration and other aspects of cultural interchanges. Could you discuss your works in this aspect, how you see or not see the old heritage as part of your own identity through your works? And what are your views in the new forms of heritage that best reflect new African identities, and particularly those identified with the youth within the city of Mombasa?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Beauty, for that question. Allow me to merge the two questions together. I will start with what are my views as the new forms of heritage that best reflect the new African identities. I think as young people, we are constantly aligned to the urban language that is coming up, evolution within language. Swahili for us has constantly been a form of communication. But when it comes to young people and their identity, Sheng becomes the language that connects us. And the reason why that I see that as a new form of African identity in terms of language, specifically in Mombasa, is the fact that the fusion incorporates people from different backgrounds, different culture, different traditional practices. So Sheng in itself being a Swahili fusion of, a fusion of Swahili, English, and other indigenous languages. And as you know, Mombasa in itself has different communities. So how I speak Sheng as a young person might not be the same as someone else who speaks Sheng with the influence of a different indigenous language. So that I will see that as a new form of identity for the young people. And that relates now to the first question you asked in terms of how do I see the old heritage influencing my own identity? I see it in various areas. For example, like I said, language, but I also don't see it in other areas. Like, for example, when it comes to fashion, the new form of, or rather identity for the young people, it's the, I would call it the Eurocentric type of wear. Right? And the old heritage, we're looking at the kanga, the lesso that we see written with in Kiswahili, actually very fluent Swahili. And how it used to be in terms of the old heritage is that in fashion, that would be what would be considered as old heritage. But then as a young person, I don't directly identify with that. I identify with now the fusion of how we currently look at fashion, right? You see the video, you see how the young people are dressed is not the same way you see as old heritage. So the part of fashion, I don't see the old heritage being part of my identity, but I see the old heritage when it comes to language. And then I move to music. As the evolution you see on the video itself, we speak about Tarab and the recognition of this being a music genre. And the correlation between how Tarab uses very fluent Swahili language. And then you are seeing the new form of African identity being Sheng, influencing it down to now music genre being gengeton, incorporating the Western hip hop. So you're seeing these two aspects moving together, but not influencing actually the whole heritage. So as a young person, as I identify as a young person, I would see how old heritage is present, but I wouldn't recognize it affecting my identity because now I identify with the new form of heritage. When it comes to languages, speak Sheng. When it comes to music, I'm listening more to gengeton. But I think continuously as time moves on, there is that disconnect as a young person who wants to fuse. I have been brought up in old heritage, old cultural practices, looked at different ways in which my environment is, whether architecture, whether food. And then the expectation is as a young person, as I grow, then I am the person, or rather the people as a group carrying out the new form of African identity. Then I'm disconnected in terms of I'm expected to carry out this new identity, this new heritage, but then at the same time, be the person who learns about the old heritage. And I think with the time, as heritage, like Francesco said, it is a constant, it is not something that is fixed. So you see a lot of intergenerational changes within heritage. And as a young person, I will say there are aspects of old heritage that affect my identity. And then there are certain aspects of the old heritage that does not affect my identity. Over to you, Dr. Purity.
Thank you, Daisy. Very interesting. And I don't know, I would love to have a conversation with you at a later stage and understand how old is old heritage and what do you consider as old heritage and what is new heritage. All those are aspects probably we need to get into at some point.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. Joe, you have in recent times been involved in major campaigns in the documentation and protection of heritage. A case is the preservation of what is left of Beirut silos after the explosion 2 years ago. This case is very interesting for Heritopolis. Can you tell us how you see that element as a new heritage, part of the new identity of the citizens of Beirut? How is this, in your view, redefining the idea of heritage? And can this be an example of metropolitan heritage? Over to you.
Hey, thank you, Purity. Actually, I will start generally by saying that for me, I guess, sorry, we cannot talk anymore about an identity or a future of heritage without directly linking it to the local community, including, of course, the new generation. So if we look to the past, so we spent too much time over protecting heritage sites and monuments from the community itself. We fenced sites, we defined visiting hours, which is, of course, important to control mass tourism and vandalism, but limiting by that as well the interaction of the local community with their own sites. Thus, the community lost its interest as a result, unfortunately. So I think it's about time to redefine the concept of heritage management in general, putting the local community at its very core. And this is what I think is the true definition of a metropolitan heritage, when we extend the heritage beyond the scale of the monument itself. So this includes making them part and essential stakeholders in the decision-making process, not just by teaching them at school that heritage is important and should be preserved. Communities should have a say or a word on how they perceive their own sites, on how they envision the role that those sites will play in their daily life. Take the example of Beirut that you mentioned after the disastrous explosion that happened on August 4th, 2020, 2 years ago almost, and that severely affected the historic part of the city. Actually, the local community was the front runner in the rescue response and the rehabilitation works of the city, even in the restoration of heritage buildings to bring back life to those heritage clusters as well. Moreover, the local community was the main driver of the call for preservation and protection of the Beirut Silos site, which is the explosion site and an emblematic symbol of the disastrous event, which now is in danger of both demolition and collapse. So instead of waiting for the international organizations to call or work towards the protection of the site, the local community was aware enough that the silos now are the symbol of the explosion and that they should be preserved as both a site of heritage and a site of memory, since they are now very symbolic to the Beiruti and the Lebanese community in general. And it's acting exhaustively since then toward the classification of the site. So I guess this is a great example to say that local communities are well aware of the values of their own sites and defining their own identities when it comes to heritage. And they should be entrusted to have a say on how they perceive their relationship with those heritage sites. So for me, and based on what I said, I don't see a future for heritage away from the local communities. And this is, I believe, is one important aspect of Heritopolis.
Thank you, Hassan. Daniel, you are interested in contemporary creation like films, music, and other forms of cultural expression. Heritopolis is trying to understand how the so-called intangible heritage can join the tangible in creating a new form of heritage identity. How do you see this happening in an African metropolis like Mombasa? And how do you see the new heritage helping addressing the bigger issues like the loss of biodiversity or climate challenges? Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Purity, for this opportunity, and hello, the global world. And I am very excited to be here today. This is a a discussion as well as a learning process for me as a person. I'm an artist, and I host events at the Swahili Port Hub. And being in the creative sector shows me the wider perspective with each performance that each performer gives me. So after the Mohoa workshop and cultural training by the creative art spaces in Kenya, I came to realize there is a gap in the Friday Poetry, whereby we've never hosted an event on culture and heritage. So I tell my team, oh, you guys, let us do an event on culture and heritage. And at first they were so confused on the definition of heritage, because when they go to the dictionary, they see it's inheritance. But now they are in the metropolis. So they say, I'll speak about food because I see it as a cultural expression, and some will say I'll speak to the mode of dressing. Some say I'll use a certain language in my expression. And when you incorporate all of these artists in one room, you realize there is a lot of cultural aspects that are being depicted by each and every performing artist, and each artist has a way of creating their own world in which you can see heritage come to life and new forms of identities, whereby in the poetry field, there was nothing as spoken word. It was just poems, you chant your stanzas and that's it. But we have seen new identities like the spoken word. So people nowadays refer to themselves as spoken word artists, because that's their way of expressing themselves and performing at large. So Dr. Purity, my artists write on different topics, and they mirror the society at a very unique and creative way. And I think it's a good way in preserving, promoting, and presenting heritage from the local points and from the youth in the grassroots. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I think what Daniel is alluding to is actually, if you go to the city of Mombasa, there's a lot of youth expressing and representing heritage in the city through music, through poetry, through visual arts, and you can find artistic works all over the place, on walls, on bridges, on matatus. That's a public transportation. And this is the kind of representation that the youth are now used to in terms of expressing the heritage and defining what they think as new type of heritage. Professor Badarin, maybe there's a question for you on the Q&A, whereby someone thinks that heritage, the changes in heritage is mainly because of interpretation and the use and the recognition. Maybe you can say a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I spoke about transition and changes in heritage, I opened up a big area of discussion. So let me clarify a little bit more. First of all, we have seen, and we will see, an evolution in what we call the heritage categories. Some categories that didn't exist come up to the surface because little by little they are identified and recognized by the communities, by governments, by experts, and so on. This is what we have seen in the past, say, half a century. In fact, we have enriched quite a lot the number and the variety of heritage. I mentioned some of them. But I don't think it's enough. I mean, because especially if we look at a context that is so innovative and perhaps even unexplored yet as the metropolis, I think we have to look at other dimensions. First of all, we have to look at the way in which people identify heritage. Things exist, they don't need to be created. Things exist, but they're not heritage. And then at some point, because they take a meaning for a community, they become heritage. Because that's, as I said earlier, heritage is a social construct. So something can exist like a place, for instance, or a natural feature like a river or a lake or something, or a mountain or so, and then becomes heritage. In fact, we have many examples of this in Africa, or in Asia also, where places that where have kind of a sacred spiritual value for people. Okay, so there is a process of identification or discovery which creates new heritage, but new heritage can also be produced. I think somebody mentioned the Mohoa. Mohoa is exactly an attempt to identify what is the what best represents modern African heritage. This heritage probably exists already, simply has not been identified and recognized. So we have always to look at a process which is dynamic, in which plays around the issue of identity of communities, social bodies, different groups, and so on. Of course, there is also, a dynamic in the use of heritage, and this is something that we have seen. I mean, if you look, for instance, at heritage, like I mentioned earlier, historic cities and so on, they were, 50 years ago, they were used in a very different way than today. A new community has come to the forefront. The tourists, okay, in this case it's the tourists. So there's been a new form of appropriation by a new community. I don't demonize tourism per se, it's just that there are some cases of hyper-tourism that destroy the heritage, but certainly the tourists it's a new community that somehow interacts and perhaps innovates on the uses of heritage. So I think that also is an issue that we have to understand. And maybe it's the same heritage with different uses. So as you can see, this is rather a complex kind of analysis that we have to apply to the new context of the metropolis. And I hope we will do it together because, especially in Africa, we have very interesting situations where, this has been perhaps is probably the most interesting context where you can find new heritage, because so far heritage in Africa has been essentially determined by either as a kind of post-colonial heritage or during colonialism. It was some certain area, the natural heritage. But we are now in a situation in which the African countries have the chance around their metropolitan development to identify their own, to put upfront their own expressions and identify their own heritage. Now, of course, I understand this is just a limited answer because it's a very large and complex question, but perhaps, our friends have something to say on that. Purity, back to you. I think Purity is frozen. So is that Purity frozen? Yeah. Perhaps I can direct. Oh, sorry, Purity, you were frozen. So I think we.
Yeah, I think I was frozen. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. And as I conclude this session, I'll just turn it over very quickly to Daisy with a very simple question. You've heard Hassan has talked a lot about how we can restore and rejuvenate cultural memories and practices within our cities. And you've also had Toki talking about living heritage within the cities. And for your works, I think it cuts through both tangible and intangible. Like when you are dealing with fashion, you are also thinking in terms of the cultural practices and what the youth may want. Can you maybe just talk a little bit about, can you be able to divorce those two, the tangible and the intangible parts of heritage in your works?
Thank you, Purity, for that. I think I would explain that using a specific scenario. Currently, I would consider the tangible heritage being, for example, the Fort Jesus itself. But how we are, or rather, quote unquote, consuming it and preserving it is that we have the digitalization of the space itself, right? The stories of Fort Jesus are now digital. I don't have to go there as a young person to reconnect with that particular tangible heritage. What I do is I go to social media platform. We have young people who are doing tours within Fort Jesus on TikTok every single day, sharing their stories. And that's how those two have either the story has been preserved or it has been connected with the young people. So that would be the first example, I would say. The second one, when it comes to fashion, is the fact that fashion has grown into some form of identity or expression for the young people, right? So you would say with time, it has moved from, like you say, how the fabric is, what is used for, what occasions do I wear this? But for the young people, it's more of, I want to express myself as an outgoing, vibrant person. This is why I'm wearing this, not because of the fact that I'm supposed to wear this at this particular time or at this particular course of ceremony. You're seeing young people moving forward and saying, I want to fuse the usual, I would say, Eurocentric fabric, fuse it with kanga, fuse it with a bit of fabric that we see from the West Africa, and create something that I would consider my identity as a person. So I would say how that has shifted. It has shifted from it being now the tangible, being the fabric in itself, to now being as a form of expression for the young people. So I know I speak on behalf of the young people a lot of time. I think I'm confined to that. But in terms of now fashion being intangible for us, it is used as a form of expression. Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to hear what the panelists say for that.
I hope next time you can talk a little bit about the fabric, the kanga, whereby people have all these expressions and sayings on the fabric, and the message is passed on to someone else through that form of expression. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to thank our panelists for this session, and each of them has actually shown us that heritage and its representation will never be static, and we will always expect to see evolution of heritage through time. And what this means is that then we should be prepared to shape our conversations, our policies, ideas, procedures as we move along with the new generations. And we should give them an opportunity also to express themselves, particularly when we have discourse on the dinner table, particularly like when we have discussions in UNESCO, when we have discussions in ECOMOS. Let us bring the new generations and the youth to also give part of what they think in terms of heritage. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, everybody. Those were two fascinating panels, bringing in a wide range of perspectives from Europe and Africa, a range of metropoli, Paris, Beirut, Mombasa, Krakow, Fez, and bringing all sorts of important concerns to the fore that we want to communicate back to UNESCO. My name is Claire Malhuish. I'm the director of UCL Urban Laboratory, and I'm very pleased to be representing UCL in the Heritopolis Consortium, along with colleagues of mine such as Calliope Fuseki and Edward Denison, part of the Modern Heritage of Africa project. And it's my turn now to try and undertake some kind of summing up from this incredible session. I think that the session has highlighted how heritage as a social construct, as Francesco pointed out, describes the material fabric, the natural resources, the cultural practices that we've inherited from our ancestors and will leave to our descendants, that vary, that take different forms across our different societies and sort of geopolitical regions. But essentially, we should understand heritage as forming the substance of continuity and sustenance between generations of humanity across societies on Earth. And I think that's the sort of big picture that we need to kind of hold in our minds. Where cities and metropoli come in is that they represent vast concentrated repositories of heritage, but these are too often threatened in these particular contexts by, or lost even, to conflict between humans, accelerated development, and the rapacious drive towards profit-making embedded in the world's economic, financial, and legal structures. And of course, much of this has been exported from the West to other parts of the world, for which we have to take some kind of responsibility. So these factors, combined with the intensity of the world's population growth, have severely damaged the planet's ecological systems, threatening the sustainability of human life on Earth in the 21st century. And that's the biggest challenge we face right now, and has particularly significant historic and future implications for the relationship between Europe and Africa, which have been, of course, manifested in colonialism, various forms of exploitation, and migration. I think we have to remember that not all heritage is good, and as we've touched on, societies make difficult choices about what to forget and reject, but it also constitutes, and of course we're all agreed on this, that it constitutes a vital platform and an arena for climate action, reminding us of how our ancestors understood and managed their dependent relationship with the planetary ecosystem and our cohabiting species on Earth. What has been lost in this relationship as populations have become concentrated in vast urban agglomerations, and how this can be restored. And so I really want to sort of conclude by emphasizing that this must be core to UNESCO's cultural policies and the new SDGs of UN Habitat, extending across all the clauses of SDG 11, and embedding the importance of heritage across the whole field of sustainable development and beyond for the good of all sectors of society. And so just to really try and sum that up in 4 kind of key points, which draw both on what has been said in this session and also on the conclusions of the Heritopolis report that was mentioned at the beginning of the session. So firstly, recognizing and protecting the cultural traditions, heritage and livelihoods of marginalized and indigenous communities in diverse and hybrid metropolitan societies in order to build societal empathy and social justice. Secondly, democratizing processes of participation in material and cultural heritage, especially with young people and marginalized or excluded, disenfranchised communities, to bring them into the foreground as agents of change. Thirdly, working towards zero carbon goals by curbing the construction, real estate and tourism industries, conserving the embodied carbon of existing and old buildings, and learning from the embodied wisdom of previous generations as to how to live lightly and sustainably on Earth. And I think this does also implicate serious thought about the restructuring of economies and models of value extraction. And fourthly, building and embedding in planning and cultural policy an understanding of the symbiosis between nature and culture to foster urban nature and understandings of the metropolis as an ecosystem of urban, peri-urban and rural elements which must be held in balance. So I think on that note, I will bring this session to a close. I hope that it's generated a lot of food for thought for us all to take back to our institutions and the different audiences which we engage with. And I will now hand back to Mike for a quick conclusion about the next steps following on from this webinar.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you all the people on my screen. It was really such a wide range of discussions. So the Asia Pacific focused on policies. we focused on economics and continuity. The Globinar is essentially a milestone which we're passing at breakneck speed. In other words, it's not something we're stopping at. And we are actually having then the research forum, which will be taking place as a continuity of our activities of the Heritopolis. So please stay on board. We have our website is beginning to come together, and this will be our opportunity of putting our ideas, as mentioned previously, everything which was in the chat, which was in the question and answers, and with the other activities, which will form the part and parcel of our report. It'll be sent around as a draft so people can feel to add or subtract or to change, so we should be able to make a difference. Again, please, thank you all for participation, and we look forward to continuing this debate in Heritopolis.